What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you all of the Mass Effect Trilogy companions ranked. So, to kick this off, I recently reviewed all 3 games in the Mass Effect Trilogy via the Legendary Edition, and after the first game, I realized that there was too many companions to really talk about them in the reviews themselves. So I decided to make this video talking about all the companions and how I felt about them while also ranking them. That said, with the tiniest bit of awareness, I understand that this is a trilogy that has a lot of very impeccably written companions, and thus people have a lot of strong opinions about their favorites, etc. So as I've been working towards this video, I've been anticipating some fun discussions in the comments. That said, the bottom of my list and the top of my list, I'm pretty attached to and feel strongly about myself. There are a few in the middle that you catch me on one day or another, I might move some around, but the top and the bottom I'm pretty concrete about. And then moving on from there, depending on how you count all of the companions, you might come up with different numbers. There are temporary ones that are only with you for a little while. Obviously, we're not going to be talking about those. And then one of the companions can alternate with another companion that looks the same. So again, depending on how you want to count, you might come up with some different numbers. Usually somewhere between 19 and 22. I'm going with the 19 version myself, cutting out the temporary companions and combining the alternative companion, if you will, into one list. But all of that said, let's actually kick this thing off and start talking about the companions themselves. So first up, we have Kaidan at the very bottom of the list in the number 19 spot. If you watch the reviews at all, I didn't really care for Kaidan much. I felt like his story in general was kind of generic. Now, it's my understanding that he served with Shepard for a decent amount of times before the game actually kicks off. However, in the first game, unless you're playing female Shep, he just really doesn't get a lot of dialogue at all. And what little you do get about him is that he is a biotic who has the older version of the implants which help him use those biotic powers, but that was about all I got out of him. Now, obviously, he does have more of a backstory than that. He trained under a Turian commander that absolutely hated humans, actually, or disliked them at the very least. And this leads to a pretty rough situation. And again, he has a backstory, but his in-game representation, if you're just playing male Shep, is really boring, and I just didn't like the guy. Then in Mass Effect 3, if you chose to keep him alive in Mass Effect 1, he questioned your intentions all the time because you were working with Cerberus in Mass Effect 2, which is fair, but as a character I already didn't like, I found it incredibly annoying. And then there's like an, oh, we're pals again scene, and it's like, I never liked you to begin with, to be honest, so it just kind of felt off for me, and as such, Kaidan's at the bottom of the list, was not a fan. In our number 18 spot, through no fault of his own, actually, is James Vega. Now, James Vega is a companion that is with you in Mass Effect 3, and as such, he really doesn't get a lot of characterization in comparison to all of the other companions for the most part, and on top of the fact that, as I mentioned in some of the reviews, he's another human companion, which in the world of Mass Effect with all these different species, some of which are companions, the human companions feel a little boring as a result of all that. And again, he came in super late with the trilogy, so he just doesn't feel as compelling as a lot of the other companions do. But overall, he does actually have a pretty decent backstory. I actually liked it a lot, but your interactions with him in the games kind of revolves around helping him decide whether or not to join up with the N7 training. And overall, he was a cool character, but again, he just didn't get enough screen time to really rank farther up on this list. And then in our number 17 spot, we have Zaid Masani. We first meet him in Mass Effect 2, and he is a respected bounty hunter and soldier. He's a pretty cool guy in the sort of like rough and tumble bounty hunter type way, but he's actually added into the game via a DLC. And just like Kasumi, as a result, they both kind of don't get a lot of characterization, and you don't have as many conversations with him. But while I didn't necessarily dislike Zaid, it's just that he's kind of a standard archetype, if you will, for a bounty hunter. He's sort of a gruff, foul-mouthed kind of guy. He has questionable morals. It's like, I don't know, I've met this guy in 100 different games. But nonetheless, he's kind of cool in that chummy soldier sort of way once you've hung around him for a while, and so he gets number 17. Now, in the number 16 spot, we have Javik, and this is the Prothean companion from Mass Effect 3, also added with a DLC from the Ashes. But Javik's a pretty interesting character that, kind of like James, because he's new to the series and Mass Effect 3 doesn't obviously get a lot of screen time as a result, but his backstory is that he's a Prothean. He was alive during the times that the Reapers in the previous cycle were destroying the Protheans. He was born into war. The invasion had already begun when he was born. It's all he ever knew. And through his story, you find out that for him, the time was instantaneous. He went into a stasis pod, and then the next moment, you're waking him up. So he has a lot of strong opinions about Reapers and obviously gives us more information about the Protheans. He tells us all about their kind of interesting sensory way of dealing with technology and how they can absorb experience and memories through just touching other organic things. And it was really cool and interesting to see a Prothean be brought into the series. Again, I just wish there had been more time with him, which, not to say that narratively it would have made sense, but it's hard to care much about the character that late into the game. Again, already with all of the other cool companions. But nonetheless, a cool character who had some interesting insights to give us about the background of the Protheans. That brings us to number 15, and that is Jacob. Jacob we first meet in Mass Effect 2, and he is working for Cerberus. Now, he's ex-Alliance, and he's still kind of on the fence about Cerberus. Now, I like Jacob mostly because he's just a cool guy. And I actually kind of like his attitude towards Cerberus. He's not completely sold on them. He's just working for them after some disillusionment with the Alliance military. And once he realizes what they are and what they're all about, he leaves them. And we see that play out in Mass Effect 3. Now, interestingly enough, if you are Fimshep and you have romanced him in Mass Effect 2, he winds up leaving you in Mass Effect 3 if he's still alive, as he sort of begins another relationship with a Cerberus scientist or ex-Cerberus scientist. So kind of a funny way to go there. Now, in the number 14 spot, we have Ashley. Ashley is an interesting character, especially if she makes it all the way through to the third game. Now, Ashley has a pretty interesting backstory as well. Her grandfather led one of the only human defeats in the galactic community, if you will, with the First Contact War. So she's got a bit of a chip on her shoulder about that. In the first game, she's incredibly distrustful of aliens to the point of kind of being racist about it. And in Mass Effect 1, that's most of her personality. And of course, she can be romanced if you're male shep. She also talks a lot about how the other races will abandon the humans given the chance. And I've seen a lot of people, as I reviewed the game, kind of say, well, she's proven right, and that's what happens in Mass Effect 3. But I would disagree with that, actually, because the reason the other aliens don't help you in Mass Effect 3 is because their planets are also being bombarded. And the entire point of the plot of Mass Effect 3 is giving those guys some relief and help so they can then send their fleets to help you. Which I simply don't agree with the characterization of people saying that she's proven correct. I just disagree with that entirely. What I will tell you is that she gets a lot better if you go. So if she makes it out of the first game and into the third title, you kind of get to see her grow up. She has been away from Shepard for a while. She's only briefly in Mass Effect 2 if she lived in Mass Effect 1. And by the time Mass Effect 3 rolls around, she's seen some promotions and just kind of done a lot of growth as a person. She winds up becoming a Spectre herself, obviously kind of in the same way Kaidan does for the most part, just kind of like the opposite end of that, if you will, since they kind of alternate depending on which one lived. And by the time, again, Mass Effect 3 rolls around, it kind of feels like she let go of some of her more deep-rooted beliefs about other space races, if you will. And as a result, she becomes a lot more bearable, but she is still kind of low on the list for me in that regard. And that brings us to number 13, and that is Kasumi. Kasumi is another companion from Mass Effect 2. She is a thief, kind of antisocial type, and she has a pretty cool loyalty mission in Mass Effect 2, actually, where you kind of help her with like this little heist thing, and it's a lot of fun. Now, her loyalty mission kind of revolves around her chasing down the gray box, as it's called, of her ex-lover, who has passed away, which is why it's an ex. But she's kind of trying to honor his memory and just kind of remember him and retrieve his property, basically, which held some important information. But she has an interesting personality. She's kind of quirky. Again, antisocial. She likes to stealth around everywhere and just kind of pop in on people's conversations. And on top of that, in Mass Effect 2, she was actually one of my favorite people to have in my squad because she's very effective combat-wise, because she'll do this Shadow Strike thing that her class gets, which was very effective on Insanity for me. So she wound up being in my party quite a lot. She has some cool moments. She's kind of an interesting, mysterious figure, but like a lot of the other kind of lesser companions, if you will, she doesn't get a ton of time and story development in comparison to a lot of them. Now, for number 12 on our list, we have EDI. EDI starts off as the voice of the ship in Mass Effect 2, and in the third game, the ship's AI that has kind of been working for you already becomes an actual robot, if you will, that's capable of going with you, but she is still kind of the ship's AI. I liked EDI a lot just because it was really funny to see her and Joker kind of have all these weird scenes where they're kind of in a relationship, and she makes a lot of like really creepy jokes about just like typical AI stuff, and she made me laugh quite a bit. And she gets a decent amount of story, actually. There are some missions she's required to come in with you, and then her interactions with Joker, who's always a little kind of awkward in and of itself. It was just a lot of fun for me to watch, and I had a lot of good laughs as a result of EDI being around and kind of making these jokes. And as her character develops, you can kind of help guide her down a path in terms of the lessons she's learning from humans and kind of mold her personality a little bit. And overall, it was just kind of a cool concept for a companion that, for me, landed pretty well. And that brings us to number 11, and that is Legion, kind of our other robotic companion. Legion is the Geth companion, and he's pretty cool. So the Geth start out as the kind of main antagonist of Mass Effect 1 that you fight against. Obviously, they're not the literal main antagonist, but you fight them a lot. So in Mass Effect 2, they kind of give you Legion as a way of kind of fleshing that out a little bit and kind of explaining that there are fractures even among the Geth in their way of thinking, as the Geth are the sentient AI creation of the Quarians. And as such, the Geth have all this backstory and lore, and Legion acts as your Geth delegate, if you will. He kind of clues you in on all this stuff that you might not have known because, again, they were just kind of presented as an antagonist in the first game. And as a result of Legion's missions in Mass Effect 3, you kind of get a real sense that the Geth just want to be able to live in peace, if that makes sense. They gained sentience, were immediately assaulted by the Quarians for it, defended themselves, and even then didn't want to wipe out the Quarian. They were just kind of getting to grips with their existence, basically. And there's a lot there to sympathize with directly because of Legion and all of the interactions they gave him. And despite him actually not managing to get that much screen time, you get him basically towards the end of Mass Effect 2, and then a lot of his development is in Mass Effect 3, where he can quite possibly not live if you allow him to give the Geth full sentience, if you will, and the ability to act as individuals rather than a collective. And it was a storyline that just resonated with me, so he's actually pretty high up on the list. But that brings us to number 10, and that is Grunt. Grunt is a tank-bred Krogan. The Krogan are a really cool race that, due to some genetic engineering, have been unable to properly reproduce, basically. Only, I believe the statistic was 1 out of 1,000 births actually makes it. And this is the result of the genophage, produced by the Solarians, specifically to curb the Krogan. And Grunt came about as a result of this, in a way. So he was genetically engineered by a Krogan scientist to make, the perfect Krogan. Not so much to cure the genophage, but to rather exist in spite of it. And as such, Grunt is considered, biologically speaking, the perfect Krogan. However, he was bred in a tank. He was a full-grown Krogan as soon as you meet him, so you can kind of help him also come to grips with his existence in a similar vein to Legion, actually, in that way. And you can kind of just help him figure out who he is. And that's a lot of the story that goes into hanging out with Grunt. And basically all of the companions, if he lives to see Mass Effect 3, you can, again, kind of help him through this and just become the best Krogan he can be, for lack of a better term. And while he doesn't get a ton of character development in that way, what they do have, again, just kind of resonated with me, and I liked it a lot. And that brings us to number 9 on our list, and that is Miranda. So Miranda is an interesting case. She's one of the humans that I actually managed to like quite a bit, which surprised even me, because I wasn't expecting to like her very much. When I first encountered her in Mass Effect 2, she kind of came across as just really annoying. However, you learn from her as the story goes on that she was actually also genetically engineered by her father, who controlled her basically her entire life until she managed to break away, and all of her loyalty missions and stuff in game kind of revolves around trying to protect her sister, which is essentially her twin, who was also controlled a great deal by their father. And I suppose what I liked about Miranda was that while she comes across as haughty and superior in a lot of ways, if you get underneath all of that, she's genuinely a good person trying to do the right thing in rather extraordinary circumstances. Or at least that was my read of it and how she interacted with Shepard on my run-throughs. But on the flip side of that, I could also see someone just being like, this person is the worst, and never wanting to deal with her. Could go either way. But I liked her characterization, and especially the way she kept trying to stick up for her sibling when her sibling couldn't stick up for herself. And that brings us to number 8, Samara/Morinth. So depending on the choices you make, you might end up with Samara or Morinth. Samara is an Asari Justicar, which is like a sort of Asari monk that is someone very dedicated to a code. And if they see anybody break this code in front of them, they will basically just kill them, which is why a lot of them typically don't leave Asari space as to avoid incidents. As Samara herself puts it, if your code forces you to kill someone, finding out they were actually an amazing father doesn't really help you feel better about it, as their code is incredibly strict, but she's very powerful as a result. Now, her thing is that she has 3 daughters, all of which are what are known as Ardat Yakshi, which are essentially Asari whose mating kills people. So Asari mate with any species via a sort of mental melding, which allows them to then reproduce another Asari with some of the traits of whatever the other species was that they mated with. However, the Ardat Yakshi just straight up kill their partner every single time. In fact, they can't even have kids from this. They just killed their mate and absorb their power, and they become a bit of a nightmare. And as such, the Asari government tries to keep this hush-hush, and any discovered Ardat Yakshi are basically told, we're either going to kill you or you can live your life in seclusion. Take your pick. Samara has had 3 daughters, all of which who are Ardat Yakshi, and as a result, one of them, Morinth, decided not to accept this fate and run off and do her own thing and basically be what she is, an Ardat Yakshi, and go around killing and gaining power this way, as apparently the process can be rather addicting. Now, what I like about the Samara side of this stuff is that if you go through with it and kill Morinth, Samara actually tells you how very proud she is of Morinth. Because while her other daughters chose to live in seclusion and everything, which is probably the right moral decision, Morinth, while inarguably a bad person and needing to die, as Samara even acknowledges, was still the only one of her daughters who chose to brazenly be herself at the cost of her life. And in that way, Samara was proud of her, and I thought that was a really cool thing. But Samara's a complicated character like that. Now, on the flip side of that, you have Morinth. Morinth is the daughter who looks exactly like Samara, and during their confrontation via the loyalty mission, you can choose to kill Samara instead and take Morinth with you. Morinth is kind of her complete opposite personality-wise. And you can actually even seduce her, but if you've been paying attention at all, this will kill you. So it's very possible to get Shepard killed by mating with Morinth if you chose to go that route, which I think is hilarious that they let you do that, by the way. But these 2 characters, along with giving you just all of this Asari lore and just kind of having complicated thoughts about complicated things, really, is why I rank them so highly. I enjoyed them a lot. But that brings us to number 7 on our list, and that is Thane Krios. Thane is a Drell. Drell are very rare. They were almost wiped out. They were saved by the Hanar, which are the weird jellyfish race. Thane was raised to become an assassin, and what I like about Thane so much is that a lot of his character development revolves around his own complicated feelings about being a father, as he lived his life being an assassin, which meant he was away often, and he's not exactly proud of what he is and what he does. And when his wife passed away, leaving his son alone, he kind of decided the best thing to do would be to just bail, and leave his son to be raised by someone who isn't, a cold-blooded murderer. But Drell also have the unique thing of having a photographic memory, so he quite literally remembers every wrong thing he's ever done, and it haunts him a great deal. To add further complication to that, Thane is also dying. He has a disease which is slowly killing him, and in Mass Effect 3, if he's still alive, that disease actually does just that. He succumbs to it finally and passes away, leaving whatever relationship is left with his son, which is the crux of his loyalty mission in Mass Effect 2. And I gotta tell you, as a father, I'm a sucker for any story involving this kind of thing. I fully admit that. And as a result, Thane's story to me was deeply moving, especially if you're there for the last moments of his life, which really got to me, honestly. But that brings us to number 6 on our list, and it is actually Liara, another Asari companion. Now, I mentioned in my Mass Effect 1 video that I found her a little boring, and I stand by that. In Mass Effect 1, she's a little boring. She's kind of this young ancient history researcher, and is just a very kind of awkward and somewhat naive character. And she just didn't have a lot going on. She has a bit of a touching moment with her mother in one of the missions, so it's not like it was all bad, but overall I wasn't wild about it. Now this all changes starting in Mass Effect 2, because in Mass Effect 2 she becomes the Shadow Broker, as she has spent the years since your disappearance from Mass Effect 1 to Mass Effect 2. It's been a couple years, and in that time she becomes an information broker, and then through your help via a DLC in Mass Effect 2, she becomes the Shadow Broker, and she's kind of grown up and become much more cynical as a result. And if you pursue a romance with her, you kind of really get the feel of this. And then by the time Mass Effect 3 rolls around, which she becomes another full-fledged companion in, she winds up being a sort of mix of those two things. On one hand, she's kind of cold and calculated when she needs to be in an effort to save as many lives as possible and kind of do the right thing in her role as a Shadow Broker. But also in some ways, there's still this almost wistfulness about her in a way that kind of captures that naivety, if you will. But in many ways, she grows up and becomes more aware of what the world really is as the games go on. So while I wasn't impressed with her in Mass Effect 1, I really liked where they took her story. But that brings us to number 5, and it is none other than Mordin, the Salarian scientist, also known as the creator of the genophage, which is what is crippling the Krogan. Mordin is such an incredible character, because on one hand, he thinks what he had to do to the Krogan is what he had to do. After the Salarians lifted them up to fight a war, they basically began rebelling and trying to kill everyone and anything, and they very likely could have taken over the galaxy and who knows what else. So as a result, the genophage was created by Mordin and then spread to curb their population. However, throughout the game and his loyalty missions of Mass Effect 2 and Mass Effect 3, he can question whether or not that was the right thing, or he can feel regrets about it, if anything. And depending on, how you play things out and if he lives through the suicide mission of Mass Effect 2, you can get what I think is his best ending, and this is my personal opinion, of course, but the ending where he dies curing the genophage. He goes up the Shroud Tower to make sure that the cure is delivered properly, knowing full well that it'll be what kills him. And that with his last act, he kind of undid this kind of unimaginable cruelty that was dealt to the Krogan. So if that story wasn't in and of itself really deep, it also helps that Mordin has a really great personality. He talks very quick. Salarians live only like 40 years, so they're very quick about basically everything they do. And he also has a couple of songs that he can sing, which are absolutely hilarious, and I'm so glad they put that in there. It makes me chuckle every time, as I'm sure it did a lot of people. But number 4 on our list is the psychotic biotic herself, Jack. Now, Jack was my main romance, if you will. So I ran through each game a few times, but Jack was the character I was like, okay, this is the character I'm romancing on my main playthrough, if that makes sense. Because if you've watched this channel for any length of time, you might be aware Jack is kind of my type. Beyond that, she's also, in my opinion, the coolest human companion, hands down. So you start by finding her in a prison where she is set free and then escapes almost immediately in a fit of biotic rage, but you eventually manage to recruit her to your team. But she hates Cerberus because Cerberus performed a bunch of experiments on her and made her an incredibly powerful biotic, which is like psychic powers. And as you talk to her more and more, you get the sense that this is just a tragically abused person who has thrown up a very caustic personality as a result. You can, if she, of course, lives like all the other companions, kind of help her out with that. And by the time Mass Effect 3 rolls around, she's found her place in the world by teaching other biotic people who need training how to be better. And as she states herself, she would defend those kids with her life, if only to prevent what was done to her being done to other biotics. and it felt like a very appropriate way for her character to go. So I liked that a lot. And again, she was basically the only human companion that I was like, this character is awesome, especially compared to all of the other alien races we're talking about. But that brings us to number 3, and it is Rex, the main Krogan companion, who we meet all the way back in Mass Effect 1. I really love the characterization of Rex, because he's a Krogan through and through, but he's smart enough to know when not to act like a Krogan, if that makes sense. So while other Krogan have taken the genophage and just accepted it as a death sentence and do mercenary work, etc., Rex is the only Krogan you really run into asking why no one's trying to do anything about it. If you talk to him in Mass Effect 1, he's like, do you see any Krogan scientists around? Everyone's just resigned themselves to this. And he feels very differently about it. And as a result, throughout the series, again, if he lives, you see him take up the mantle of Krogan leadership. He becomes like their main clan leader, and he decides he's going to do things differently, which in combination with Morden's loyalty missions and everything, they kind of entangle themselves pretty deeply together. The version that I liked the most is where Rex takes over, if you will, for the Krogan and ushers in Krogan that are less hellbent on war when it doesn't make sense for them. And as they put it, it has only ever brought them misery and it's time to do something else. In combination with Morden's sacrifice, with his line, it was just really deep. But I like the characterization of Rex. He's very clearly trying to elevate his entire race, as he puts it, whether they like it or not. But all in all, I would say probably the plot just around the genophage, I think, was so well done. It had a lot of really incredible moments. But that said, that's number 3 on the list. So for number 2 on the list, we have Tali Zora. Tali is a Quarian who we also meet all the way back in Mass Effect 1, which means she gets a huge line of dialogue and questing, but the Quarians are a really interesting race. They, of course, made the Geth sentient AI, which sort of pushed them off their home planet and onto the migrant fleet, a massive fleet of ships. Living this way has forced the Quarians to wear biosuits, which protect them from having their own fragile immune systems, basically, which gets them sick all the time. So Tali can kind of clue you in on all of this, but more than that, she's a fantastic character. She has a great personality, and she starts Mass Effect 1 as kind of being this excited and, again, somewhat naive Quarian, just excited to see the world as she is out on her pilgrimage, which is a sort of coming of age for Quarians, and you can help her do just that, be successful in her pilgrimage and bring the other Quarians back something of value, which completes her pilgrimage. And then as the games progress, she eventually becomes an admiral. You can help her defend her place among the Quarians in Mass Effect 2, or potentially even get exiled. And you're with her in some really touching moments where, for instance, she finds out her father passes away or has passed away. And then depending on your choices with Legion as well, it's possible to use Tali and Legion to reconcile the Geth and the Quarians and make things better for all of them. Make peace where there was nothing but hatred after a point. And that's not even to mention the fact that you can actually romance Tali as well, which is also very touching. And Tali is just an impeccably written character. She has a great character development arc where you see her start as this kind of naive engineer who becomes a full-blown admiral doing what's best for her people, and it's really no surprise that she's a fan favorite romance. But that naturally brings us to our number 1 spot, and that is none other than Garrus Vakarian. And I really like Garrus because something about a grizzled space cop just really hits this setting perfectly. Like, he could have been the main character without any exaggeration. He is really great. So in the first game, he is working for CSEC, the sort of space cops on the Citadel. However, he's a little frustrated with their approach, so he joins your team to help more. And then in Mass Effect 2, you catch him being a vigilante, again, kind of disillusioned with CSEC. And then in the third game, after all your encounters with the Reapers, he's a sort of military advisor on the Turian capital of Palaven, giving what little he does know about the Reapers and putting it to use. And on top of that, he can become really good friends with Shepard. There's a lot of just fantastic scenes between them. You can take him out for drinks and like this awkward wingman thing. And then there's a sort of friendly competition where you guys decide who's the best shot at the end of one game. And overall, it was just really well done in a sort of we're best bros kind of way. Now, he is also romanceable, if that's your thing, if you're Finshep, but like a lot of the more interesting companions, he tells you more about his particular race, the Turians, and their sort of military meritocracy that they live by. So he's just got all this really interesting stuff going on that, again, I think just lands perfectly in the setting that was built. And by the end of the trilogy, I was just like, we're best bros, Garrus. But beyond all that, guys, that is going to wrap it up, and that is our rankings for the Mass Effect companions. Broadly speaking, regardless of my rankings or anyone else's really, I think the writing for the characters and their storylines is really the best of what Mass Effect has to offer. As I've done these reviews and a couple story thought kind of videos, if you will, what stood out to me about the Mass Effect trilogy was the character writing and development and the world building itself. So honestly, it has been a joy to play through this game and kind of get to know these characters and see all the ins and outs. And, in some cases, just whether or not they even live to see the rest of the games. But there's a lot here to love, so this is kind of a ranking thing where I could see rankings vastly different from mine making perfect sense for somebody else. So with all of that said, guys, I really hope you enjoyed the video. I had a lot of fun making it. I had a lot of fun playing these games. And now I turn it over to you to leave me with the, I'm sure, complete agreement of my own rankings in the comments section below. I'm sure absolutely no one will disagree with me in any fashion, as my rankings were amazing. On the off chance you decide to tell me how my rankings are all wrong and it's actually this particular way, don't forget to like and comment and subscribe while you're at it. But regardless, truly just thank you so much for watching, especially if you've been watching all my Mass Effect reviews on this subject. While I do plan on playing Andromeda for the trilogy, it's safe to say we're leaving it here for a while until Mass Effect 4 gets released, whenever that happens to be, if it actually winds up finishing development. We shall see. Thank you again. I truly do appreciate you watching. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.